So have you turned on the news recently and this is what you see?
The United States economy has been much stronger than people expected.
Turning now to some positive economic news. The Commerce Department reports that the economy grew at a faster than expected pace of 3.3% in the fourth quarter.
So you're telling me that the economy is strong, but you're also telling me that I also see this?
The new year is not starting off on a happy note for workers at some of the country's largest tech companies, with more layoffs just announced.
Citigroup is eliminating 20,000 jobs over the next 2 years as part of a restructuring plan, and Xerox announced over 3,000 layoffs, or about 15% of its workforce. Other companies announcing layoffs so far this year include BlackRock, Universal Music Group, Duolingo, and the messaging platform Discord.
So on one side, you see that the economy is strong, almost stronger than it has ever been, as the US economy added around 353,000 jobs in January alone, which actually doubles what the economists had expected. Now keep that number in mind because we'll be using that later. But on the other side, you also see that these big tech firms are making massive cuts and layoffs. And we're talking about thousands of people who are losing their jobs. That also represents thousands of families who are also impacted from this job loss. And it seems like every tech firm is doing this. Just January of this year, Microsoft has laid off 1,900 employees. eBay has cut 9% of its workforce, affecting 1,000 full-time employees. And not to mention, Wayfair has also cut 13% of its global workforce, affecting 1,650 people. And Google has also laid off hundreds of people this past month, but the CEO even mentioned that there will be more layoffs coming in 2024. So in total, for Google has laid off more than 12,000 employees since 2023. And the crazy part is that they spent around $2.1 billion in severance and other expenses, which is just mind-boggling. So in my mind, I'm trying to figure out, how do you have so much layoff happening in the news? Meanwhile, you're telling me that we have a strong economy with a very low unemployment rate at 3.7%. Now, there's only a few possibilities on what's really happening in the background. One is that the unemployment rate is not a true reflection on what's going on. And what I mean by that is that the unemployment rate does not account for underemployment. Now, that basically means that someone could have a job but may end up being overqualified to the point where they're technically employed, but they have a job that they didn't actually study for in school. So a classic example is someone who works at a coffee shop, but may end up having a PhD in, I don't know, math or physics, let's say. And the second possibility is that these layoffs are accounted for within the unemployment rate, but although the numbers of people who are out of a job seems like it's a lot, in reality, it might actually be much lower than the grand scheme of things. But first, I want to talk about what's going on and why these companies are doing massive layoffs in the first place. And if I could boil this down, it really comes down to appeasing the shareholders. Just like I'm trying to appease you guys, so make sure you like the video and subscribe if you like finance videos like this. So basically, the tech stock market overall fell by more than 30% in 2022. Now, for example, Google share prices went from 141 in March of 2022 all the way down to $86 in November of 2022, which is almost a 40% drop. And that's because there were high interest rates, high inflation, and the uncertain economic conditions, which basically means not knowing whether or not there's gonna be a recession coming. Now, if you zoom into one company, let's say again, Google, you look at the Q4 results in 2023, this past year, you see that they actually made around $20 billion in net income or profit, which is almost $7 billion more than they made in Q4 of the previous year at $13 billion. So basically that shows that they don't actually need to make these layoffs. And maybe the profits will be slightly better because they did, but it's not like they actually need to make these cuts just to keep this company afloat. It's really to, again, appease the shareholders at this point. And if you zoom back out, the tech stocks have gone up by 43% in 2023 and rose by another 3% in January. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the layoffs are what's causing the share prices to go up, but it also seems like the companies are able to win back the investors by focusing on increased profits and firing tens of thousands of workers to combat the number of people hired during the pandemic boom. And you can see the evidence in this graph where Google had about 156,000 workers in 2021, but even with the massive layoff, they still have 30,000 more workers in 2023 than they did in 2021. So what's really going on here? Why is the news saying that the economy is doing so well, but you also see companies making these cuts? So going back to the possibility one, where people have jobs but they are considered overqualified, underemployment is actually really tough to measure. It is a possibility that people are overqualified in their jobs but are still employed, and by definition, it shows that the economy is strong and the job is plentiful. So given that the data is tough to measure in this case, let's just say it is a possibility. but may not be a strong indicator on what's going on right now. But if we're to assume that the unemployment rate is correct, that leaves us with possibility number 2, which is that these massive layoffs are blown out of proportion and is very small numbers compared to the rest of the job market. So according to Layoff FYI website, they estimate that the tech companies laid off more than 260,000 workers last year due to overhiring during the pandemic and high interest rates. But this means that if you were to divide that number by the 12 months out of the year, that comes out to around 21,000 people laid off each month in 2023. But if you then compare this number to what I mentioned in the beginning, that the US economy added 353,000 jobs in January, this means that these job losses are only representing 6% of the total job added in that month. If you see this graph, you see that there's a total of 164 million jobs in 2022. In the tech industry, in this case, information role, represents around 3 million people, which is actually only 1.9% of the overall economy. And this is pretty eye-opening for me because I actually assumed that the tech would have made up, I don't know, maybe around 10% of the economy, given that there are a lot of jobs in retail and healthcare, but I didn't actually think that there would be less than 2% before looking at the data. Then in that case, it actually almost makes sense that even though there's so much layoff happening on one side, in companies like Google and Amazon, that you could still have an economy that's still growing and that both statements could be true without contradicting each other. But I do want to hear from you guys on what you think is happening in the economy right now. So let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.